مقداره 50,000 سنة فاصبر صبرا جميلا إنهم يرونه بعيدا
especially for this purpose, and of course for Brother Ghulam Hussain also. He's here from New York. Molana is the Director of Islamic Research Institute in New York. He's quite active in the East Coast. He's co-editor of the book Fundamentals of Islam. Molana has written quite a few books, as I understand, and he's one of the writers of the book History of Islam. Molana has done his master's in pharmacy here. He is by profession a pharmacist. He's an extremely good zakir, and he's well known for his speeches in English and the propagation of Islam and the work that he has been doing. He is welcomed here on behalf of IEC, especially Molana Sayyid Zaki, who has very high regard for Molana. By the way, Molana sends you all Eid Mubarak and salams and dua. He has sent this message through a telephone call. The brother had called me and reminded me. He's sorry that he is not among you, but he wishes all of you a very happy Eid Mubarak. Molana inshallah will be here for the next 3 days. He'll be here tomorrow for between Zuhar and Asr prayers. He will be giving a small lecture. Inshallah, Molana will be here to preside over the Jashan, the celebration of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam on Saturday evening. The program, of course, is a very lengthy one, and let me make some quick announcement now. Inshallah.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على أهلها. My brothers and sisters, it gives immense pleasure to be among you, to be with moments, to be in the company of those who believe in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is always a pleasure. I saw the center here and I was impressed by the programs that you planned. Hopefully, inshallah, we'll see more and more input from the members of the community. Remember, if you don't help by supporting and sustaining the programs, they would not succeed. Programs are not for individuals, they are for the collective benefit of the whole community. Wherever I go, my message is that we as Muslims are in minority to begin with in this country. In a country that's predominantly non-Muslim, in a country where the major currents are against Islamic belief, the Muslims are in minority. We, the Jafri Muslims, are a minority within a minority. And if we are to think in terms of who is who and who is what, from where he originates and to where he belongs, would be in a very bad situation. We must realize that as Muslims, we have a common destiny, a common goal, a common life, and eventually a common hereafter. We fail to realize at times, because of our prejudices built in our own backgrounds, that we, after death, when we face Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala on the day of judgment, and the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he won't be asking us from which land you emerged. what was your geographical background? Were you a Persian? Were you a Pakistani? Were you an American? He will ask us, were you a Muslim? How was your belief in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? Those of you who have the privilege of knowing talqeen as is recited would testify to it that the question about ethnicity and geographic origins don't arise. The questions are man rabbak, man dinak, man nabiyak, man kitabak, man qiblatak. Who is your Lord? Who is your prophet? What's your deen? What's your qibla? If we as Muslims consider the answers to any of these questions relevant, we must be reminded that geographic origins don't play a role in any of these answers. I must stress again and again that those of you who in the remotest parts of their mind are thinking about their origins from India, from Pakistan, or from other parts of the world, okay, as the deciding and guiding factor in their Islamic activities, are not following what we in our times know as Khatt Imam. And in a sense, that is the Sunnah of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Khatt Imam is nothing new that we have been told that there is new. It's precisely acting on the dictates of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and the Sunnah of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. What Imam Khomeini did was crystallize that concept which was not practically applied to our lives in our time, led a revolution and defeated all odds against it to achieve success, proving that those who submit and surrender to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, those who are His obedient servants, cannot be trampled perpetually. Victory is not a matter of days, months, or years. Even if something happens in Iran today, in Islamic Republic, God forbid, what Imam Khomeini did to the minds of millions of Muslims outside Iran and within Iran would not be altered or changed. That revolution that you see every day in every country, everywhere in the world, in the minds of people, in the minds of Muslims, cannot be changed. We have witnessed the revolution. We are the witness to that revolution. And that witness would remain with us till we die. So what is the real criteria of our being together? What is the real essence of our being together? The real essence is Iman only. I have been at times reminded that majority of people in this area are from Pakistan, and hence Urdu should be the lingua franca. Okay. That people are from Arabia, so Arabic should be the lingua. Arabic is an exception. All of us must learn Arabic, try to speak Arabic, try to understand Arabic, and make sure that our generations know Arabic so well that the coming generation has Arabic as the lingua franca of all Muslims. We don't have to stand up here and talk in English, or for that matter in Urdu or any other language. A Muslim should communicate to another Muslim in Arabic. Of course, I'm not saying that English, which is a language, must be discarded. No. You may learn as many languages as you like. What is important that without understanding Arabic, the immense treasure of Quran and Sunnah remains alien to you unless someone comes on the pulpit and explains it to you. Even though we have translations of few things in English, okay, the vast body of Islamic literature is in Arabic, and then in Persian, and then in Urdu. That's how it goes. That vast body of literature would remain alien. So we must first try to have our association with each other in the name of Islam and Iman, not in the name of geographic origins, number one. Number two, we must try to implement Arabic as much as possible. Number three, we must look for opening up full-time Islamic schools so that we are able to protect our coming generations. If we don't, the generations would be lost, and you would be responsible. To Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for the lost generation of Muslims. No one can stand up and say that the conditions I was living in was so bad. I had to work from 8 to 8 or 8 to 12 or whatever it was. I couldn't find time. Remember, the migration to this country, for those of you who are immigrant, was a choice. For those of you who are indigenous to this country, American Muslims, the migration to Islam was a choice. With the choice, there is always a consequence. Face it. Be prepared to live by it. In the words of Imam Khomeini, Rizwanullah alayh, those who talk about the differences between Shias and Sunnis are not from either of them. Why is it important that we must have a unity with other Muslims? I am not saying that you forsake the Jafri school of thought, or for that matter, whatever your school of thought is. What I am saying that to survive in this country, you must have a unified stand against those who oppose Islam. When your child goes to school and the question comes to attend the music sessions or not, whether you are a Hanafi or a Jafri would become irrelevant. When the scarf is snatched from the head of your young girl in a secondary school by the classmates, it would be irrelevant whether you are a Hanafi or a Shafi or a Maliki or a Jafri. There will be things where Muslims must take a united stand so that they are able to achieve what Sharia dictates. Example, for Eid. How many of you get the holiday off for Eid? A couple of them. Probably those who have their businesses. Probably those who are working for Muslims. Have you seen any Jew working on Yom Kippur? Absolutely not. Even if that Jew is a non-kosher Jew, is a liberal, ultra-modern Jew, he is not going to work on Yom Kippur. He may not go to the synagogue. He may stay and watch the TV, but he is not going to work on that thing. Because they want to make a point. The point is that it is our holiday and we are entitled to it. Why aren't Muslims doing the same? I don't know what problems you have about parking and alternate parking here. In New York it's a severe problem. Okay. On every single Jewish holiday, all parking rules are suspended in New York. Why not the Muslim holidays? Because we have been unable to forge a stand together. We talk in groups, in bits and pieces, exactly the way our enemies want us to do. Exactly the way those who oppose Islam would like to happen. We make it much easier for them, much easier for them. On the local level, on the international level as well. For 50 years, this country wanted to have its military bases on the Arabian soil, in the Arabian Peninsula. It happened through our courtesy. They were invited. Whatever the dynamics were, it's a lengthy story, inshallah. Someday, if we get a chance, we can speak on those things. But one thing was very, very important in the whole issue, that the whole area where this war took place was predominantly a Jafari area. The north of Kuwait, the south of Iraq. An overwhelming majority of those who were killed were the same. Not only that, actually this war was hustled quickly for one reason. When the Iran-Iraq war ended, under the auspices of United Nations, there was an exchange of prisoners of war. And about 100,000 prisoners of war of Iraqi origin who had been in Iran and who had witnessed the Islamic Revolution and who had changed their hearts and minds were transferred to Iraq. It was very difficult for Saddam Hussein to liquidate them overnight. They were sent to the Kuwaiti theater to be mopped up by the American forces. You must have heard that a lot of them were buried alive in their trenches, bulldozed over. And those of them, about 60,000, who surrendered, were not allowed to go back to Iraq and help the uprising in Iraq. How many of you know about that? The Prophet ﷺ said that one who wakes up in the morning without any concern for fellow Muslims is not one of them. What concerns do we have for them? Do we really know what happened? Do we know that many Iraqi young men, to stop the tanks of Saddam Hussein, had the bombs wrapped around their bodies and had jumped in front of tanks to blow up the tanks in South Iraq? It was when the tank war became impossible for Iraqi army that helicopter gunships were ordered in, and the champions of peace who were monitoring the Persian Gulf allowed them to do so. Of course, the young boys, the young mujahideen, could not intercept the helicopter guns. Do we know what happened? Do we know that more than 300,000 people were killed by this butcher of Baghdad? And do you know that he has been kept in power precisely to do the dirty job he is doing? Why the so-called uprising by their name and the revolution by our name was not allowed to succeed? We had an Islamic government in Iraq, in the south of Iraq, for a few days, with Basra as the headquarters. And this Sayyid Bakr al-Hakim, the son of Ayatollah Muslim al-Hakim, one of our greatest Maharajas, as the leader. The people know very well that if and when a freely democratic Iraq, so as to say, paraphrasing them, would emerge, those who would hold power would belong to a particular school of thought. And as Wall Street Journal reported, that Riyadh did not like and did not want it to happen. Another Iran, no, we can't take it. And hence, he was allowed to remain. More so, had the democratic institutions taken over, had the revolutionary government been in power in Iraq, do you think the inspections that are happening would have happened? No. They want to keep him in power precisely so that every single threat from within Iraq is destroyed. They know eventually that he's going to be finished, and that a new government that would emerge would be a strongly Islamic government. Today, tomorrow, or the day after, the destiny is an Islamic government. That has to happen. But let's make sure that that government that comes out, that emerges, is deprived of any physical power. Unfortunately, they don't realize that power lies with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala alone. That He is the source of all power. It reminds me, someone from Pakistan went to Iran and talked with the Irani leaders, and particularly with Imam alayhi rahmah. Okay. And they were speaking about the world affairs, and they remarked that how come you have such antagonist policy against both superpowers. In those days, the second superpower was also considered a superpower. Today, they have the virtual monopoly. They had the monopoly then also, but it was just a show. There existed something else. Why you have so bad a relationship with these two superpowers? No, we have excellent, good relationships. Who says we have bad relationships? How could you say, Sayyid, you on one hand lash out at United States, the superpower, as the great Satan. On the other hand, you lash out at the Soviet Union, and you say that you have very good relationships with them? The Sayyid smiled and said, it's a difference of opinion. We consider Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and His Prophet to be superpowers. Our concept of superpower is distinctly different from your concept. To you, the worldly powers are superpowers. To us, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is a superpower. And yes, we have extremely good relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the superpower. In our times, people weigh things as a matter of physical life and death. They don't realize that as Muslims, the apparent loss of life is the highest prize a person is getting in the eyes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, shahada. In the eyes of the West, and for that matter anyone else, when a person is killed, when a person is dead, he has lost everything. In the eyes of Islam, when a person is slaughtered in the way of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he has gained everything. That is distinctly different from the concept that West has and the concept that these ideologies have. Our concept is that the life belongs to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and the only life worth anything is the one spent in the way of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. A life that is dictated by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, a life that is on the will of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and is spent in the way of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. In Karbala, there were people, very old people, in their 80s. One of the companions of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, in his 80s, he had a crooked back. He couldn't stand firm. Yet, he was there. Imam alayhi salatu wasalam said, the jihad is saqit on you. For you, there is no jihad. And he said, Sayyidi, shahada, is my desire. Because that is the ultimate that a human being can achieve. To them, death is death. To us, death is life, if it is in the way of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. What Imam Khomeini did, that he put this principle of life and death in our times in proper perspective. Something that was considered theoretical, he made practical example out of it. Today, Muslims in Iran, in Lebanon, in Iraq, and elsewhere in the world are much more at peace with the concept of Shahada than they ever were. Today they are willing to die much more than they ever were. His message, his preaching to the people, his understanding of events, his grasp on the politics of Shaitan, in addition to the politics of Rahman, which he always had, was so accurate and was so pinpointed that in spite of their attempts, and so many, in fact, those of you who would live for 40 years from now and would be able to see some of the documents of these days which would be available after 40 years under the Freedom of Information Act, would be able to see that how many attempts were made to discredit, to destroy, and destruct the personality of Sayyid Khomeini. Some of the attempts we know. They are not public, but we know how many attempts were made. The truth is that one who submits to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala becomes immune to any such attempt. The message is then, surrender and submit to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and no one else. If you want to live as Muslims, and if you are not enslaved by the mighty dollar, and if you don't have a disease called dollar mania, for which there is no known cure, you must submit to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in entirety and completeness. True, some of you smiled, but that's the way it is. That's a disease for which there is no cure. As a matter of fact, it is the love of the riches, the love of dunya. That is the root cause of all troubles. The Prophet ﷺ said, حُبُّ الدُّنْيَا رَأْسُ كُلِّ خَطِيئَةٍ. The root cause of all trouble. The difference between a practicing Mu'min and a pronouncing Muslim is that he who practices is not enslaved by dunya. To him, it is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala who is ultimate. If you have that concept, you'll be able to face, challenge, and win. Victory does not mean physical gain. Victory at times means destruction of your physical body. The flow of the blood, the trampling of the body, the cutting of the bones, the piercing of the eyes, the cutting of the tongue, and so on and so forth. But that is the ultimate victory. For a person who believes in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, for a person who surrenders to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the ultimate is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The eventuality is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The total is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The message of this day, the 17th of Rabiul Awwal, the message of Islam, the message of the Prophet of Islam is that believe in Allah the way the Prophet wanted you to believe in Allah. Do you remember a person saw the Prophet sleeping under the tree all alone? This guy, infidel, a Meccan, had a sword in his hand, and the Prophet was unarmed, completely unarmed. The Prophet was resting. This man approached the Prophet. It's once in a lifetime opportunity to kill the person who is talking ill about their God. It would have been so simple. The guy shouted, I have a sword in my hand. Who can save you from me, from being killed? The Prophet opened up his eyes, he smiled and said, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The sword fell from his hand. The Prophet picked up the sword and said, now who can save you from me? The guy didn't have any answer. The difference between a Muslim and a non is that a Muslim considers in a sense Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala as the ultimate power. Of course the guy became a Muslim later on. That's a different story. But what I'm trying to point out is that from the advent of Islam, the life of the Prophet ﷺ, we see it strikingly, a concept that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the ultimate. You must make Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala the ultimate of your life if you want to live as Muslims in this country. Or as a matter of fact, if you want to live Muslims anywhere in the world. It doesn't have to be this country. And finally, when you submit to Him, realize His greatness, His omnipotence, and realize your nothingness. Unfortunately, at times, we think ourselves to be great. That I is with capital everywhere in the world. Ana. It's always capital. Because we think so much of our own selves. I did that. Just realize that whatever you did was by the energy, the force, the power that Allah gave to you. Your thanks should be to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Try to be thankful to Him. If you have said prayers, try to be thankful to Him. It was because of Him that you said the prayers. If you did something nice, be thankful to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Don't be arrogant. Arrogance is something that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala dislikes and disdains completely and totally. Don't consider yourself to be everything. It is said that the Prophet ﷺ was seated with his companions and he was talking to them. The question propped up. The Prophet asked, if it comes to the accountability of people by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, no one will be able to pass the test. Some of the companions were really dismayed. And one of them asked, "Oh Prophet, that means you too." Now this is the greatness of our Prophet. Okay. He said, "Yes, except that I am surrounded by the mercy of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala." He didn't say that I am the Nabi, I am the Prophet, I am the Khatimun Nabiyyin, the last of prophets. I am Masoom, I don't commit sins. Okay. I am protected. I am immune to sins. I am great. No. What he said was that yes, it is the mercy of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that surrounds me. Even if you do something nice, consider it to be the mercy of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that is letting it happen. Don't have the arrogance. Don't have the idea of arrogance. The Prophet was sitting with his companions, and his companions were rich and poor, some very rich and some very poor. An older companion was sitting next to him, and there were other companions too. And then there was a rich companion who was sitting at the back. a poor companion of the Prophet walked in and sat next to the rich companion. The rich companion shrugged away, moved his clothes. Probably those who have too much don't like the company of those who don't have anything in the physical scale. That was true then, and probably that's true now. He shrugged. The Prophet saw that. Nothing could escape his eyes. He saw that. And in one of the rare moments in his life, when he showed his extreme displeasure, the Prophet remarked, "Why did you do that?" He didn't name anyone. He didn't say what the act was. He didn't mention the act. He said, "Why did you do that?" The person obviously understood that he was on the receiving end. Paused for a moment and said, "I'm sorry. I am willing to depart with half of my belongings if this Muslim brother of mine forgives me." The Prophet looked at the Muslim brother, the poor companion. Your brother has made an offer to you. Remember, this is just for shrugging off. This is just for removing the clothes. No word has been used. No glances have been exchanged. Okay. No backbiting has been done. And today in our society, every single day, we have Muslims cursing each other. We have Muslims talking bad about each other. We have Muslims backbiting each other. And we never think that what we owe to the person against whom we have been speaking. But then was a different time, probably. The person realized that an error was committed. An error was committed and should be compensated. The poor companion said, "O Prophet, I forgive him. But I don't want a single penny of the riches, of the wealth that made him arrogant in the first place." Today, it is that wealth that is the center of our attraction. Times are different, aren't they? Attitudes are different, aren't they? Acquiring wealth is not wrong. Let me point that out to you. If the wealth is acquired legally, by legally, I'm not talking about the American law. By legally, I'm talking about the Islamic law. Opening up a liquor store may be completely legal as far as the American laws are concerned. As far as Islam is concerned, it's totally illegal. I'm talking in the terms of Islamic law, that if you acquire the wealth legally, you spend it legally, there is no harm in acquisition of wealth, provided you are not attached to it. At times what happens, that we acquire it legally. We also spend it legally, but there is an attachment. That attachment must never come. A mu'min is detached from everything else except Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. His attachment is for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. His love is for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. His relationship is based on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. You are brother to a fellow Muslim and mu'min because he also believes in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Remember, it is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that is the link between us. If that link is not there, if that concept is not there, things become an exercise only and nothing else. You may have rituals, you may have prayers, you may have majalis, you may have mahafil, you may have qasaid, you may have everything in the world. But if that link is not there, that binds you together through the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, through the Ahl Bayt alaihimus salatu wassalam, then you are gone. My friends, I don't want to take much of your time. I would request you that whenever you get a chance, ponder on the points that I made. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give us the light, may He give us the guidance, and may He keep us steadfast in His own way. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, make sure that we, your humble servants, are guided by you, that we see the re-emergence of Islam completely and totally in the whole Muslim world, and finally with the advent of Mahdi alayhi salam in the whole world. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give strength to the forces of Islam in Lebanon, in Palestine, in Iraq, and elsewhere in the world. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala protect the Islamic Republic of Iran, the leadership in Iran, and make it a role model for all Muslims to follow. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala make our lives the way you want it to be, and not the way the West wants us to be. Allahumma salli ala Muhammadin wa ala Muhammad. Allahumma salli ala Muhammadin wa ala Allahumma salli ala Muhammad.